Hello, my dear friends. You're standing on a muddy track, the kind that clings to your boots as a gentle mist settles over the rolling hills of 19th century Bohemia. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, livestock, and the sweet, woody perfume of 100 cooking fires. In the distance, a cluster of timbered cottages huddles together, their thatched roofs like shaggy, sleeping beasts. It's a scene of rustic tranquility, a pastoral dream that artists love to paint. But if you were truly dropped here, with only your modern sensibilities, you probably wouldn't survive the first winter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, try to picture it. Imagine the bite of the evening air on your cheeks, the lowing of a distant cow, the soft flicker of candlelight beginning to appear in the windows. This world operates on a different set of rules, an unspoken ledger of debts and duties that dictates every moment of life. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first instinct is to seek warmth, to find shelter from the creeping chill. You are drawn, as anyone would be, toward the inviting glow of the nearest cottage. Through a small, warped pane of glass, you see the flicker of a fire. This, you think, is the heart of the home. The storybooks and paintings have prepared you for this moment. You imagine a grand stone hearth, a fire crackling merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. You can almost feel the radiant heat on your face, hear the hiss and pop of the logs, and smell the comforting aroma of a stew simmering in a cast-iron pot. This is the sacred center of family life, the place where generations gather, where stories are woven into the very fabric of the evening, where laughter and love provide a bulwark against the harshness of the world outside. It's a powerful, romantic image, a symbol of domestic bliss and security that feels timeless and universal. You picture yourself sitting on a rough-hewn bench, a bowl of something warm in your hands, feeling utterly safe. But as the door swings open on creaking leather hinges, the illusion shatters. You are not met with warmth and light, but with a wall of thick, acrid smoke. It rushes into your lungs, making you gasp and cough, your eyes instantly watering and stinging with a pain so sharp it feels like grit has been thrown in them. You try to see, but the air inside the single-room dwelling is a permanent, swirling twilight, a grey-brown fog that obscures everything. There is no chimney. The fire, a small, smouldering pile of wood and peat, sits on a clay platform in the center of the room, its smoke rising lazily to wander about before hopefully finding its way out through a small hole in the roof, or the ever-open door. This is the Din Jaber, the smoke room, and it is the shocking, suffocating reality of that cozy cottage ideal. You stumble forward, blinking through tears, and begin to notice the details. The wooden beams of the ceiling are not a warm, honeyed brown, but a greasy, glistening black, coated in a thick layer of soot that has accumulated over generations. If you were to reach up and touch one, your fingers would come away sticky and stained. Everything in the room shares this grim patina. The simple wooden furniture, the clay pots, the sleeping pallet stuffed with straw in the corner, all are veiled in the same dark, oily film. A side of bacon and a string of sausages hang from a blackened rafter, not just near the smoke, but in it, being perpetually cured by the very air that makes your throat roar. The smell isn't the pleasant aroma of a campfire. It's a dense, penetrating stench of stale smoke, unwashed bodies, and old grease that clings to the back of your throat and infuses your clothes in an instant. The family members who huddle within don't seem to notice. Their eyes are perpetually red-rimmed, their voices raspy. A constant, hacking cough is the baseline rhythm of life here. Now, it's easy for us to see this as a primitive, unhealthy nightmare, and it was. Respiratory illnesses were rampant, and life expectancy was brutally short. But this wasn't a design born of ignorance. It had its own strange, desperate logic, an entry in that unseen ledger of survival. The smoke, for all its misery, was a powerful ally. That greasy soot coating the rafters wasn't just grime, it was a preservative, making the wood resistant to rot, mold, and the wood-boring insects that could bring a house down. It sealed the thatched roof from the perpetual damp, preventing leaks and mildew. The constant fumigation kept vermin like mice and rats at bay, and it protected their precious cured meats from spoiling. In a world with no refrigeration and few resources, sacrificing your lungs for a preserved winter food supply and a sturdy roof was a grim but rational trade-off. Even more than that, the smoke was seen as a shield. In a worldview where misfortune, illness, and death were not random, but were often attributed to malevolent spirits, witches, or the evil eye, the thick, purifying smoke was a form of spiritual armor. It was believed to create a protective barrier that no evil could cross. The suffocating smog that made you weep and choke was, to the family living within it, a holy fumigant, a cleansing agent that kept the unseen horrors of the world outside their door. They lived within this cloud not just for physical preservation, but for spiritual protection. It was the price they paid for security, a debt settled daily with their own breath. And as you stand there, your eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom, you realize that this smell, this all-pervading scent of soot and survival, is the true perfume of this place. It clings to every person, every object, a constant, unspoken reminder of the fine line they walk between life and death. It's a scent that follows you out of the cottage and into the village, clinging to your very skin, a scent that even permeates the fine, colourful clothes they keep so carefully hidden away for special days. You step back out into the muddy lane, the sting in your eyes slowly fading, but that thick, smoky scent now feels permanently attached to you, a souvenir from the suffocating heart of the home. But then the church bell begins to toll, a deep, resonant peal that cuts through the morning mist, and the village undergoes a miraculous transformation. Doors open, and people begin to emerge, not as the smoke-stained figures you might expect, but as brilliant butterflies emerging from drab cocoons. It's Sunday, and you are about to witness the glamorous illusion of their Sunday best. The sight is breathtaking. The women are adorned in their traditional crod, a costume of such vibrant colour and intricate detail that it seems impossible in this world of mud and soot. Their skirts are a riot of crimson and gold, layered one on top of the other. Their bodices are tight, richly embroidered with floral patterns so dense they look like living tapestries. The sleeves are the most astonishing part, enormous, puffed creations of white linen, starched to a crispness that makes them rustle with every movement, adorned with delicate, handmade lace at the cuffs. Red ribbons cascade from their hair, which is intricately braided and pinned. The men are just as splendid. They wear immaculate white shirts, dark, embroidered vests and narrow trousers tucked into tall, gleaming leather boots that have been polished to a mirror shine. Everything is a performance of prosperity, a public declaration of worth. As they walk towards the church, their posture changes. They are no longer stooped figures from a life of hard labour. They stand tall, filled with a visible pride that radiates from the splendour of their clothing. It's a weekly pageant, a defiant splash of beauty against a drab backdrop. You see a young woman adjust the angle of her starched cap, its wide, fan-like wings of lace framing her face like a halo. You watch a farmer proudly smooth his woolen coat, its buttons shining in the pale light. You can't help but be captivated by the sheer artistry of it all. This isn't just clothing. It's identity, history, and family honour made visible, a pristine and perfect heirloom. But as a woman passes you a little too closely on the narrow path, you catch a scent that clashes violently with the visual perfection. It's not the fresh smell of clean linen you'd expect from those brilliant white sleeves. Beneath the faint, pleasant aroma of dried lavender or mint that's been tucked into the folds, there is a powerful, musty odor. It's the unmistakable smell of stale sweat, old smoke, and unwashed human bodies, an aroma that has been pressed and layered into the very fibres of the garment over years, maybe even decades. This is the shocking reality hidden beneath the magnificent facade. These priceless, beautiful clothes are almost never, ever washed. To submerge one of these creations in water would be an act of catastrophic vandalism. The vibrant colours, derived from delicate, hand-ground plant and mineral dyes, would bleed and fade instantly, turning the masterpiece into a muddy mess. The painstaking starchwork that gives the sleeves and caps their architectural form would dissolve into a limp rag. The fine woolen felt would shrink and warp. So instead, these garments, which often represented a family's greatest financial asset, are maintained with a dry-clean-only philosophy born of pure necessity. After a day of wear, a day of sweating through a church service, of dancing at a festival, the costume is carefully aired out, perhaps hung in a breezy spot to let the worst of the human scent dissipate. Any mud splashes are meticulously brushed off once dry. Small spills might be spot-cleaned with a damp cloth and a bit of luck. Then, the garment is folded with protective layers of linen and stored in a carved wooden chest, often with sachets of dried herbs to combat the inevitable others and insects. The clothes you are seeing have been worn by this woman's mother, and perhaps her grandmother before her. They carry the faint, ghostly imprint of every festival, wedding, and christening they have ever attended. That brilliant white isn't clean, it's just not visibly dirty from a distance. The crispness isn't from fresh laundering, it's from a carefully preserved, decades-old application of starch. The logic behind this seemingly unhygienic practice is woven directly into the fabric of their lives. These clothes were their bank accounts. The young woman's complete crod was her degree, a public display of her family's wealth and her own diligence, as she would have spent thousands of hours embroidering it. It was worth more than land or livestock in some cases. To risk its destruction for the mere concept of being clean would be financial suicide. Furthermore, the costume was a direct link to the ancestors. Wearing the same garment your mother wore on her wedding day was a profound act of connection and respect. The faint, lingering scent of smoke you detect is a clue to its life. It spent its off days stored in a chest, inside the very smoke room you just fled, being passively fumigated and preserved. The appearance of cleanliness, the illusion of purity, was what mattered for maintaining social standing. The underlying reality was a secret everyone understood and accepted. Their public image was a carefully constructed performance, and as long as the boots were polished and the ribbons were bright, the unwashed truth beneath was a private matter. This understanding, this acceptance of a hidden, less than perfect reality in service of a greater social need, extended beyond just clothing. It seeped into every aspect of life, especially into matters of health, where the cures offered by the village wise woman were often far more mystical than medical. Leaving the procession of brilliantly clad villagers, you wander away from the church path, your mind still trying to reconcile the vision of pristine lace with the lingering scent of old sweat. You notice an older woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her back stooped not with frailty but with a lifetime of purpose, slipping away from the main crowd. She carries a small linen bag and moves, with a quiet authority, towards a cottage set slightly apart from the others. This is the Bohemian, the village midwife and herb woman, the keeper of life's thresholds. The glamorous illusion surrounding her is one of profound, earthy wisdom. You picture her as a font of ancient botanical knowledge, her home filled with the pleasant, aromatic scents of drying herbs, chamomile, yarrow, St. John's wort hanging in tidy bundles from the rafters. You imagine her as a gentle healer, her hands skilled in preparing soothing poultices and calming teas. In the stories, she is the one who can read the secrets of the forest, who knows which root eases a fever, which leaf stanches a wound. She is a figure of natural, almost magical, medicine, a benevolent guardian against sickness and pain. Her cures are the stuff of legend, a testament to the power of nature and the wisdom passed down through generations. You follow her at a discreet distance, curious to see this folk medicine in action. She enters the cottage, and through the open doorway, you see a young mother anxiously rocking a baby who is wailing with the relentless, painful cry of colic. The young mother looks to the old woman with a mixture of hope and desperation. Now, you expect to see the midwife reach into her bag for a bundle of dry chamomile or fennel to prepare a gentle tea. Instead, the old woman leans over the crying infant, her expression one of intense concentration. She mutters a series of words you can't quite make out, her voice a low, rhythmic chant. Then, she does something that makes you recoil. She collects a good amount of saliva in her mouth and spits directly onto her finger. With this finger, she traces a small, wet circle on the baby's forehead and another over its tightly clenched belly. The shocking reality is that her cure has very little to do with herbalism and everything to do with mystical belief, bodily fluids, and ritual. You watch, stunned, as she continues. She doesn't consult a botanical guide, she consults the unseen world. She pulls a crust of bread from her bag, chews it into a paste, and applies this spittle-soaked poultice to the baby's navel. She then takes a strand of red thread and ties it loosely around the infant's wrist, all the while murmuring what sounds like a mix of prayers and incantations. For your modern mind, this is unhygienic, nonsensical, and potentially dangerous. Introducing bacteria-laden saliva to a newborn seems like madness. But you are witnessing a system of medicine that operates on an entirely different set of principles. The why behind these actions is a complex blend of pre-Christian folk magic and a thin veneer of Catholic ritual. In their worldview, an ailment like colic wasn't just a matter of trapped gas in the digestive system. It was a potential intrusion of malevolent forces. A baby, beautiful and new, was especially vulnerable to the Ahranet, the evil eye, a curse brought on by an envious glance. Sickness was an external attack, not an internal imbalance. Therefore, the cure had to be a form of spiritual defense. Spittle was not seen as just a bodily fluid, it was believed to contain a potent concentration of a person's life force, their spirit. By anointing the baby with her own saliva, the midwife wasn't spreading germs, she was applying a powerful, personal amulet, a shield of her own vital energy onto the child. The chewed bread wasn't for nourishment, it was a symbolic offering to appease whatever spirit might be causing the torment. The red thread was a classic form of sympathetic magic, a vibrant, life-affirming colour meant to deflect and repel the evil eye. The muttered words weren't just gibberish, they were the activation code, the specific formula needed to make the magic work, passed down from midwife to midwife with exacting precision. She was not a doctor, in our sense of the word. She was a spiritual combatant. Her role was to fight invisible battles on behalf of the villagers. While she certainly did possess a working knowledge of which herbs could soothe a cough or ease a stomach, that was often secondary to her primary function as a magical practitioner. The villagers trusted her not because she had a deep understanding of anatomy, but because she had a deep understanding of the spiritual dangers that lurked in every shadow and every jealous glance. Her authority came from her perceived ability to negotiate with this unseen world. The rituals, the spells, these weren't primitive misunderstandings of science. They were the weapons of choice in a war they believed was being fought all around them, every single day, and the belief in these rituals, the absolute faith that they would work, was often a powerful medicine in itself, the original placebo effect. Her work was most critical at life's great turning points: birth, death, and of course, marriage, an event that combined joyous celebration with a terrifying amount of ritualistic chaos. The community's trust in these deep-rooted customs becomes even more apparent as the seasons turn and the village prepares for a wedding. From a distance, the celebration appears to be the pinnacle of joyous, harmonious community life. The glamour of the illusion is intoxicating. You imagine a beautiful, sunny day, the entire village gathered in their finest, most colourful crowd. The air is filled with the sweet, lively music of a fiddle and an accordion. You see the bride, looking radiant and serene in her elaborate costume, a crown of fresh rosemary and ribbons in her hair, a symbol of her purity and remembrance. The groom stands beside her, proud and beaming. You picture long tables groaning under the weight of festive foods, mountains of coal, sweet pastries filled with poppy seeds and cheese, roasted meats, and overflowing jugs of beer and wine. It's a scene of perfect pastoral bliss, a celebration of love, unity, and the promise of a prosperous future, all under the benevolent gaze of friends and family. This is the idealized image of a folk wedding, orderly, beautiful, and deeply moving. But as the day unfolds, this serene picture begins to fracture, revealing an undercurrent of ritualized chaos. The shocking reality begins with the nos nesti, the ritual abduction of the bride. Just as the feasting and dancing reach a fever pitch, a group of the groom's friends, often masked or disguised, will suddenly rush in. Amid feigned screams and laughter, they grab the bride and whisk her away, spiriting her off to a nearby tavern or a neighbor's barn. The music screeches to a halt. The party is thrown into a state of orchestrated panic. The groom is now faced with a critical, public test. He must rescue his bride. This isn't just a fun and games interlude, it's a deeply serious, though theatrical, community ritual. The groom's best man and a cohort of his own friends must form a search party and track down the kidnappers. When they find her, a tense negotiation begins. The kidnappers will demand a ransom. This isn't a token amount. It can be a significant sum of money or a promise to pay for several rounds of drinks for the entire tavern. The groom must pay. To refuse or even to haggle too much would be a sign of stinginess and a profound public humiliation. It would suggest that his new bride isn't worth the price, casting a shadow of dishonor over the marriage before it has even truly begun. You watch as the groom, flustered but determined, hands over the coins. The bride is released, and they return to the wedding feast in a triumphant procession, the music starting up again with renewed vigor. The why behind this strange and disruptive custom is multifaceted. On one level, it's a symbolic reenactment of older, more violent times of marriage by capture, a nod to a wilder past now tamed into a theatrical game. It serves as a public test of the groom. Is he resourceful enough to find his bride? Is he generous enough to ransom her without complaint? Is he respected enough to have friends who will help him in his quest? His handling of the situation is judged by every single guest. It's a form of social vetting, performed on a public stage. But it also serves another, even more crucial purpose. It reinforces the bonds of the community. The abduction is never a secret. The entire village knows it's going to happen. The tavern owner, where she is taken, is a willing participant. The chaos is controlled. By participating in this shared drama, kidnappers, the rescue party, the gossiping onlookers, the community collectively affirms its role in the new union. This ritual acknowledges a fundamental truth of village life. Marriage was not just the union of two individuals, but the merging of two families, and an event that reconfigured the social network of the entire village. The abduction and ransom are a symbolic payment, a way for the groom's side to publicly acknowledge the loss the bride's family and community are experiencing. She is being taken from them, and this act must be compensated. It's an entry in that great unspoken ledger, a debt paid with cash and beer to smooth over the social disruption of the new family unit. This chaotic ritual ensures that by the time the bride is safely returned, everyone has played their part, all social obligations have been met, and the marriage is now fully and properly integrated into the village fabric. The celebration can now continue, leading inevitably to the next great milestone that would require its own set of protective and peculiar rituals, the birth of their first child. Following the chaotic joy of the wedding, it isn't long before the village anticipates the arrival of a new member. The birth of a child is a momentous occasion, a promise of continuity and another pair of hands to work the land. The idealized vision of this event is one of quiet, maternal strength and communal support. You imagine the new mother, tired but glowing, resting in a clean bed, her hair neatly braided. The baby is swaddled in soft, white linen, sleeping peacefully in a sturdy wooden cradle carved by its father. Neighboring women arrive with gifts of food, a nourishing broth, a loaf of fresh bread, their faces warm with shared happiness. The air in the cottage is calm, filled with a sense of wonder and reverence for the miracle of new life. This is the sacred, almost holy, illusion of childbirth, a clean, blessed, and protected affair centered on the well-being of mother and child. But as you draw closer to the reality of the birthing room, this pristine image dissolves into a scene of intense, almost paranoid, ritualistic defense. The shocking truth is that the primary concern is not hygiene, but a desperate, spiritual battle against unseen evils. The midwife, the same one you saw curing colic with spittle, has just delivered the baby, but her work is far from over. Her first actions are not to clean the infant or make the mother comfortable. Instead, she immediately begins to fortify the room against supernatural threats. She takes a clove of garlic from her pouch, crushes it, and rubs the pungent paste onto the window frames, the door jamb, and even the legs of the cradle. Then, she produces a tangle of bright red ribbons and threads. She ties one strand around the baby's tiny wrist, another around its ankle, and pins a small red bow to its swaddling clothes. Amulets made of bone or specific stones might be placed in the cradle. The baby is not washed immediately. In fact, washing the baby too soon is considered extremely dangerous, as it would rinse away the protective layer of vernix caseosa, which they saw not as a biological coating but as the baby's first, God-given magical shield. When the baby is finally given its first bath a day or two later, the water isn't just water. The midwife might add specific herbs known for their protective qualities, but more importantly, she might add a splash of holy water, a few drops of the mother's milk, or even a coin to buy the baby's health and fortune. The bath water itself is then treated like a hazardous substance. It cannot be simply thrown out. To do so would be to risk an evil spirit, or a witch finding it and using it to cast a spell on the child. The water must be carefully disposed of in a place where no one walks, often poured at the roots of a strong, healthy tree to transfer that vitality to the infant. The why behind this intense, seemingly superstitious behavior is rooted in the terrifyingly high rates of infant mortality. In a world without antibiotics, sterilization, or an understanding of germs, babies died. They died often, and they died quickly, from infections, diseases, and complications that seemed to appear from nowhere. Faced with this unbearable powerlessness, the community didn't turn to science they didn't have, they turned to a system of magic they deeply believed in. Every one of these actions had a specific, logical purpose within their worldview. The baby, in its state of pure innocence, was considered a liminal being, not yet fully anchored in the world of the living and therefore incredibly vulnerable to the supernatural. It was a prime target for malevolent fairies who might steal it and leave a sickly changeling in its place, or for demons and the ever-present evil eye. Garlic, with its powerful, penetrating smell, was seen as a universal repellent of evil, a kind of spiritual pesticide that no demon or vampire could cross. The color red, vibrant and alive like blood, was the ultimate symbol of life and vitality. Tying red ribbons on the baby was like dressing it in magical armor, a visual warning to any lurking evil that this child was protected. The amulets, the sacred bath water, the careful disposal of it, every action was a necessary layer in a comprehensive security system. They were fighting a war against invisible enemies, and these were their proven weapons. They couldn't see the bacteria on unwashed hands, but they could imagine the envious gaze of a neighbor whose own child had died. Protecting the baby from that envy was the more pressing and understandable concern. It was a form of proactive spiritual warfare, an attempt to control the uncontrollable. This intense focus on securing a prosperous future for the child began long before its birth, starting with the very first calculations made by the village matchmaker. Before any talk of weddings or babies, before the first shy glance between a young man and woman, another, far more pragmatic meeting takes place. This negotiation is orchestrated by a figure as crucial as the midwife. the matchmaker, or Dohazova. The glamorous illusion of this process is one of romantic destiny, of a wise elder guiding two young souls meant for each other towards their happy fate. You might picture the matchmaker as a kindly, grandmotherly figure with a twinkle in her eye, someone with a deep, intuitive understanding of human hearts. She sees the quiet compatibility between the blacksmith's shy son and the baker's gentle daughter. She facilitates a chance meeting at the village well, her work a subtle art of nudging love in the right direction. The goal, in this rosy picture, is happiness, companionship, and a love that will blossom and sustain a family for generations. It's a heartwarming story of community wisdom ensuring personal fulfillment. But as you listen in on a real negotiation, concealed by the noise of the tavern where the matchmaker meets with the young man's father, the romantic illusion evaporates into a cloud of cold, hard calculation. The shocking reality is that the conversation sounds less like a discussion of love and more like a corporate merger or a livestock auction. The matchmaker isn't talking about the girl's sunny disposition or the boy's kind heart. She is talking business. Her primary tools are not intuition and wisdom, they are a sharp memory, a shrewd understanding of village economics, and an invisible ledger of every family's assets and liabilities. The conversation is a blunt inventory. The family has 10 hectares of good land. The father might start, but is it the rocky soil near the forest or the black earth by the river? The matchmaker, having done her homework, knows the answer. The river, she confirms, and they have 2 milking cows, a strong ox, and at least 6 geese. The focus then shifts to the degree, the velo. This is the crux of the entire deal. The discussion becomes even more specific and unromantic. How many feather beds will the bride bring? A feather bed was a significant item of wealth, representing comfort, luxury, and years of collected goose down. How many sets of linen? How many painted chests to store them in? Is there any cash involved? The groom's family, in turn, must prove their son's worth. He might inherit the family farm, but is it burdened by debt? Is the roof on the barn sound? Does he have his own set of tools? The matchmaker acts as the intermediary, the auditor, and the agent, ensuring that the exchange is equitable. A girl's reputation for being a hard worker or a good spinner is certainly a plus, but it's a soft asset, weighed against the hard reality of ochres and animals. Love is never mentioned. It's assumed that affection might grow later, like a crop planted in a well-ploughed field. The primary goal is not romance, it's economic survival. The why behind this seemingly heartless pragmatism is brutally simple. In this world, a farm was a family's entire existence. A bad match could lead to ruin. Marrying for love, if that love brought no land or useful assets, was a direct threat to the economic stability of not just the couple, but their entire extended family. A farm needed a certain number of hands to be viable. A household needed a certain level of resources to survive the winter. These marriages were strategic alliances designed to consolidate land, combine herds, and ensure that the family unit had the best possible chance of prospering. The matchmaker's role was to be the clear-eyed, unsentimental economist who could prevent a disastrous emotional decision. She prevented families from falling into poverty. The handsome but landless young man was a liability. A beautiful but penniless girl was a burden. The matchmaker's job was to cut through the youthful fantasies and broker a deal that made practical sense. She was preserving the economic health of the entire village, one carefully calculated union at a time. The community's welfare depended on these unsentimental choices. This cold logic was a form of protection, a shield against the poverty that was always lurking just one bad harvest or one foolish decision away. Everyone understood the stakes. The young couple entering the arrangement knew the terms. Their duty was to the family, to the land, to the future. Personal happiness was a luxury that might hopefully arise from a foundation of economic security. This constant awareness of vulnerability, of the thin line between survival and ruin, permeated every aspect of their lives, even how they experienced the quiet of the night. As the day's labour ends and the last of the cooking fires die down, a deep quiet settles over the village. The cottages, now just dark shapes against a sky brilliant with stars, seem to fall into a profound slumber. This is the illusion of the silent, peaceful village night. You imagine a world free from the constant hum of modern life, a place where the only sounds are the gentle chirp of crickets or the occasional hoot of a distant. You picture the villagers tucked into their beds, sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of the weary, secure in their homes and their community. The night is a time of perfect tranquility, a soft, black blanket of peace that allows the world to rest and rejuvenate before the sun rises again. It's an idyllic image of rural serenity, a silent sanctuary from the cares of the day. But this peaceful image is deliberately and systematically shattered throughout the night. The shocking reality is that the village has a vested interest in making sure no one sleeps too deeply for too long. Suddenly, a loud, often tuneless, blast from a horn cuts through the stillness, followed by a shouted phrase. It's the village night watchman, the Ponokn, on his rounds. His job is not, as you might assume, to move silently, guarding against thieves in the shadows. On the contrary, his primary duty is to be loud. At the top of every hour, he is required to stop at designated points in the village, blow his horn or bang a staff on the ground and call out the time, often adding a short prayer or a piece of village news. The 11th hour has struck. Praise be to God and the Virgin Mary. All is well. His voice is a recurring intrusion, a deliberate disturbance punctuating the night. Sleep becomes a fragmented thing, a series of short naps between his hourly announcements. You might see him as a walking clock, a necessary service in a world without bedside alarms. But his purpose is far more critical and complex. The why behind this noisy tradition is a matter of life and death, deeply rooted in the village's collective anxieties. The greatest terror of the night was not intruders, but fire. In a village of thatched roofs, wooden houses, and open hearths, a single stray ember could incinerate the entire community in a matter of hours. A fire that took hold while the village slept was an unstoppable catastrophe. A night watchman's hourly call was a constant, low-level alarm system. His shout was proof that he was awake, alert, and actively sniffing the air for the first hint of smoke. If he ever missed an hour, it was a signal that something was wrong, and villagers would stir, listening intently, ready to spring into action. His noise was their insurance policy against being burned alive in their beds. Furthermore, the night watchman was the village's early warning system for more than just fires. He was the first line of defense against any nocturnal threat. Was a wolf or a wild boar raiding a pigsty? Was a flash flood coming down from the hills? Was a woman going into a difficult labor and in need of the midwife? The watchman was the central nervous system of the sleeping village, a lone sentry whose job was to see and hear what others could not. His hourly call was a status report, a confirmation that the perimeter was secure. The villagers, hearing his cry from their beds, didn't curse the noise that woke them. They were reassured by it. It was the sound of safety. It meant the guardian was at his post, and they could drift back to sleep for another 59 minutes. This practice reveals the community's deep-seated distrust of silence. Silence wasn't peaceful. It was dangerous. Silence meant a lack of vigilance. It meant no one was watching. The rhythmic, predictable noise of the watchman was a comfort, a human sound pushing back against the vast, threatening emptiness of the night. It was another entry in the unspoken social ledger. The watchman sacrificed his sleep for the safety of all, and in return, the villagers sacrificed their uninterrupted rest for the reassurance of his call. This constant vigilance, this sense that prosperity and safety were not states of being but things that had to be actively and continuously performed, was never more visible than during the communal celebration of the harvest. When the last sheaf of wheat is cut and the barns are full, a great festival erupts in the village. This is the donkey, the harvest festival, and it appears to be the most generous and joyful day of the year. The glamorous illusion is one of pure, unadulterated gratitude and communal sharing. You picture a village united in celebration, their collective hard work having paid off. The landowner or wealthiest farmer hosts a feast for everyone who helped bring in the harvest. Long tables are laden with the bounty of the fields. There's music, dancing, and a palpable sense of relief and shared accomplishment. The centerpiece of the festival is the harvest wreath, a huge, intricate crown woven from the last stalks of grain, decorated with flowers and ribbons. It is presented to the master of the farm as a symbol of respect and a tribute to the earth's generosity. The entire event seems to be a beautiful enactment of the principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, a moment when social hierarchies dissolve into a shared meal and a common victory. But as you observe the proceedings more closely, you start to notice a current of tension and competition running just beneath the surface of the merrymaking. The shocking reality is that the harvest festival is less about selfless sharing and more about a ruthless and very public form of social scorekeeping. The presentation of the harvest wreath is not just a gesture of honor, it is a meticulously calculated performance. The size and intricacy of the wreath are a direct public statement on the quality of the harvest and, by extension, the competence of the farmer. A small, skimpy wreath presented to a landowner is a subtle, public insult, suggesting his fields were poorly managed. Conversely, a magnificent wreath is a testament to his success. The feast itself is a minefield of social obligation. The landowner is expected to be generous, to provide copious amounts of food and drink. But his generosity is being carefully measured by every single guest. If the beer runs out too early, or if the meat is of a poor quality, whispers will begin immediately. He will be judged as stingy or, worse, as having had a poor enough harvest that he couldn't afford to be generous, a sign of impending financial weakness. For the labourers, their attendance is not optional. To skip the feast would be a grave insult. But during the feast, they are also performing. The heartiness of their appetites, the loudness of their praise for the food, their eagerness to dance are signals of their loyalty and their satisfaction with the year's work and wages. It's a delicate dance of feigned contentment and anxious assessment. The why behind this transformation of a joyous festival into a high-stakes social audit lies in the fundamental structure of their agrarian world. The harvest was the single most important event of the year, the final tally of the entire community's success or failure. Its outcome determined who would eat well, who would struggle, and who might even starve over the coming winter. In a society with no formal contracts or credit scores, reputation was everything. The harvest festival was the annual shareholder meeting for the entire village. The farmer's generosity at the feast was his dividend payment, a public display of his success that reassured his labourers and creditors that he was a good bet for the future. The quality of the wreath and the mood of the workers were the annual report, a public grade on his performance. This system of public accounting extended to every interaction. A farmhand who appeared sullen or ungrateful might find himself without work the following spring. A landowner who was seen as miserly might find that no one was willing to help him during the next crucial planting season. Everyone was watching, and everyone was keeping score in that invisible ledger of social capital. The festival wasn't a relaxing release of tension. It was the final, critical moment where the year's accounts were settled in the open. The smiles and songs were the necessary lubricant for a ruthless economic transaction. This intense awareness of being judged, of one's fate hanging on the public perception of your actions, extended even beyond the grave, shaping the strange and vital rituals that surrounded death. After the feasting and accounting of the harvest, life settles back into its rhythm, a rhythm inevitably punctuated by loss. When someone in the village dies, the community gathers, and from the outside, it appears as a solemn and respectful process of mourning. The glamorous illusion is one of quiet grief and serene passage. You imagine the deceased laid out peacefully in their Sunday best, their face calm and at rest. The family gathers around, speaking in hushed, loving tones, sharing fond memories. The cottage is filled with the gentle light of candles and perhaps the faint scent of incense. The focus is on the soul's peaceful journey to the afterlife, a transition handled with dignity and grace. The church bell tolls slowly, a sad but beautiful sound marking the departure of a beloved community member. It is a picture of orderly, pious, and sorrowful farewell. But as you step inside the cottage of the deceased, you are confronted with a scene of frantic, ritualistic activity that has little to do with quiet remembrance. The shocking reality is that the moments after death are governed by a paralyzing fear, the fear that the soul might not leave properly, or worse, that it might try to return. The instant a person takes their last breath, a series of strange and urgent actions are set in motion. The main mirror in the room is immediately covered with a black cloth. All the windows are flung open, even in the dead of winter, to provide a clear exit path for the departing spirit. The household clock is stopped at the exact moment of death to freeze time and prevent the spirit from becoming confused and trapped within its ticking. The water buckets in the room are emptied, for it was believed a soul could become trapped in its own reflection on the water's surface. The body itself is handled with extreme care, not for reasons of reverence, but for supernatural security. The corpse is washed by designated village elders, who perform the task while observing a strict ritual silence. During the wake, which lasts for a day or two, the body is never, ever left alone. This is not just for comfort, it's a constant vigil to ensure that an evil spirit, or even the devil himself, doesn't sneak in and occupy the empty vessel. Food and drink are often placed near the body, not as a symbolic offering, but as a practical meal for the soul on its long journey. Perhaps most strangely, you might see someone touching the feet of the deceased and then touching their own eyes. This was a folk remedy, a belief that the death chill from the corpse could cure eye ailments. The why behind this web of superstitions is a profound misunderstanding of death, filtered through a deep-seated folk belief in ghosts and malevolent spirits. The soul, or dew, was seen as a physical, if invisible, entity that had to be carefully managed after it left the body. If it failed to depart correctly, it could become a revenant, a restless, dangerous ghost that would haunt the family and the village, bringing misfortune and sickness. Every ritual was a specific technical step in a spiritual procedure designed to ensure a clean break. Covering the mirror prevented the soul from seeing its new, disembodied form and becoming horrified or vain, refusing to leave its old home. Opening the windows was like opening a gate. Stopping the clock was a way of preventing the spirit from getting caught in a loop of time. These weren't just quaint customs. They were seen as essential safety protocols. The community's fear of the undead was very real. Stories of ghosts who soured the milk, tormented the livestock, or brought illness to children were a part of their oral tradition. These tales served as terrifying cautionary examples of what happened when the post-mortem rituals were not followed precisely. The vigil over the body was a guard duty. The offerings of food were provisions. The entire process was a kind of spiritual eviction notice, a series of firm but necessary steps to make sure the deceased moved on and didn't overstay their welcome. It was another critical entry in the village ledger, a final duty owed to the dead to protect the living. This idea of debt and obligation wasn't just for grand life events like death or marriage, it governed even the smallest, most mundane interactions, like borrowing a cup of sugar. This constant, nagging awareness of debt and duty, owed even to the dead, filters down from the great and terrifying moments of life into the most mundane, everyday interactions. You see it happen in the quiet of a Tuesday afternoon. A woman is in her cottage, preparing the dough for the evening's bread, when she realizes with a jolt of panic that her flour sack is empty. The glamorous illusion of village life immediately suggests a heartwarming solution. You picture her, wiping her hands on her apron, laughing at her own forgetfulness and simply popping next door to her neighbor and friend. The neighbor opens the door with a warm smile, understands immediately, and happily scoops a generous cup of flour into a bowl for her. "What are neighbors for?" she says. It's a simple, beautiful moment of spontaneous generosity, the very essence of community. It's an act of unconditional support, a testament to the bonds of friendship that make this hard life bearable. There is no thought of repayment, only the quiet satisfaction of helping a friend in need. But you are beginning to understand the unwritten rules of this place, and as you watch the flour being exchanged, you sense the reality of the transaction. The moment that cup of flour crosses the threshold, an invisible entry is made in the great communal ledger. The shocking truth is that this is not a gift, it is a loan, and it has just created a formal, binding, and very public debt. The woman receiving the flour is now socially and morally indebted to the woman who gave it. The act, seemingly private, was almost certainly witnessed. A child playing in the lane, another woman looking out her window, nothing goes unnoticed here. By evening, a dozen people will know that Ludmilla had to borrow flour from Anna. This isn't just idle gossip, it's a public update to the village's collective balance sheet. Ludmilla's household has just shown a small sign of weakness, a failure in planning, a lack of resources, and Anna's has demonstrated a surplus. This debt cannot be ignored. It now hangs in the air between the two households, and it must be repaid. Repaying it with another cup of flour weeks later isn't good enough. The debt must be settled with an act of equal or, preferably, slightly greater value to show proper gratitude. Perhaps Ludmilla will now be expected to spend an afternoon helping Anna with her mending, a task Anna detests. Or maybe she will need to watch Anna's children while she goes to the market. The debt might be called in at a crucial moment, when Anna needs someone to publicly support her side in a village dispute. To fail to repay this debt, or to be slow about it, would be a grave social sin. Ludmilla would be labelled as ungrateful, unreliable, or a poor manager. It would damage her family's reputation, that precious, invisible currency upon which their survival depends. To borrow too often is to publicly declare that your household is failing, making you a bad risk for future, more serious, favors. The why behind this intense system of favor trading is that in a world with little cash and no formal credit institutions, these favors were the economy. This wasn't a society of heartwarming, unconditional sharing. It was a complex barter system of social capital. A cup of flour was not an insignificant thing. It was a tangible portion of a family's carefully rationed supply. The difference between having bread tomorrow or not, giving it away, was a calculated risk, an investment in a social bond. This intricate web of debt and obligation was the village's social safety net. If your cow died or your roof collapsed, you didn't file an insurance claim. You called in every favor you were owed and went into deep social debt to others to get the help you needed to survive. The system worked, but it demanded constant, vigilant participation. This meant that no interaction was ever simple. Every favor given or received Every shared tool, every bit of help in the fields, was meticulously tracked by the entire community. It was a system of peer-to-peer surveillance that ensured no one shirked their duties. The weight of this constant accounting, this endless performance of competence and reciprocity, must have been exhausting for the adults who lived it. It raises a question: in such a high-stakes world, how did children learn the rules? How were they prepared for a life where every action was judged and recorded in that invisible ledger? You soon discover that their games were not merely games, they were a grim and practical education for the harsh realities they would have to face. Wandering past the village green, you hear the sounds of children laughing. It's a welcome and carefree sound in a world so burdened by adult anxieties. The glamorous illusion of childhood here is one of simple, rustic freedom. You picture children with rosy cheeks and bare feet, chasing butterflies through meadows of wildflowers. You imagine them playing hide and seek among the haystacks, their days filled with innocent, unstructured play far from the rigid schedules and digital distractions of modern life. Their games, you assume, are pure flights of fancy imitating animals, building little dams in the creek, playing tag. It's a picture of bucolic innocence, a brief, sun-drenched chapter of life before the heavy responsibilities of adulthood descend. Their laughter seems like a sound from a simpler, more natural world. But as you stop to watch a group of older children play, you realize their game is not a flight of fancy at all. It's a chillingly realistic and serious rehearsal for life's grimmest moments. The shocking reality is that their games are often direct simulations of hardship, loss, and social ritual. A group of girls is playing wedding, but it bears little resemblance to a fairy tale. One girl is the bride and she is crying not with pretend joy, but with real, practiced sobs of sorrow, because she is leaving her family forever. Another group is playing funeral. They have made a small doll from rags and are carrying it in a solemn procession. They keen and wail, mimicking the formal, ritualized grief of their parents with an unnerving accuracy. The boys aren't just playing tag, they are playing poacher and game warden, a game with very real stakes in their world, where getting caught could mean a severe beating or even prison. Another popular game is fire, where some children pretend to be a spreading blaze while others frantically organize a bucket brigade, shouting and panicking with a terrifying sincerity. These are not just games, they are training exercises. The why behind this grim form of play is that childhood, as a protected, innocent state, was a luxury this society could not afford. Children were seen as adults in training, and their play was a crucial part of their education for a life that was often brutal and short. There was no time to shield them from the harsh realities of death, social obligation, and economic peril. Instead, they were encouraged to confront these realities head-on through the medium of play, to learn the correct emotional and practical responses in a low-stakes environment. The girl playing the crying bride was learning the socially appropriate way to express sorrow and respect for her family upon her marriage, a real-life performance she would one day be expected to give. The children playing funeral were internalizing the complex rituals you witnessed earlier, ensuring that when they had to participate in a real one, they would know exactly what to do and how to behave, lest they endanger the community by allowing a soul to become a restless spirit. The boys playing poacher were learning stealth and cunning, but also the consequences of being caught. Every game was a lesson. Playing house wasn't just about pretending to be a mother. It was about scolding the children for wasting food, about mending clothes, and about borrowing a cup of flour and understanding the debt it created. This form of play was a fundamental part of their socialization, teaching them the unwritten rules of the village ledger. It instilled in them from the earliest age a sense of the constant vigilance required for survival. They learned that resources were scarce, that social rituals were critically important, and that loss was an ever-present possibility. Their games desensitized them to hardship, making them emotionally resilient for the life ahead. This practical, if grim, approach to education wasn't just confined to their games. It was also the terrifying, hidden purpose behind the fantastical folk tales their parents and grandparents told them as the nights drew in. As evening falls again, you see a grandmother gathering several small children around her by a faint light of a tallow candle. Her face is kind, her voice low and mesmerizing as she begins to tell a story. The glamorous illusion is that of a cozy, magical story time. You imagine her spinning enchanting tales of clever princes, beautiful princesses, and helpful magical creatures. The purpose of these stories, you assume, is to entertain, to spark the imagination, and to impart simple moral lessons about being kind and brave. You picture the children wide-eyed with wonder, lost in a fantastical world of castles and enchanted forests, a gentle escape from their hard, practical lives. These folktales are the stuff of fairy tales, designed to soothe children and lull them into a sweet, dream-filled sleep. But as you listen to the words of the story she tells, a chill runs down your spine. This is no gentle fairy tale. The shocking reality is that the story is utterly terrifying. She is not telling them about a handsome prince, she is telling them about the Poldnice, the noon witch, a skeletal old woman with shears who appears in the fields during the hottest part of the day to steal the heads of children who don't stay in the shade. She tells them of the Vodnk, the water gnome, a creature with green skin and webbed fingers who lives at the bottom of the millpond, collecting the souls of drowned children in little porcelain cups. She describes in vivid detail the hairy, child-eating demons of the deep forest and the vampire who preys on those who wander alone at night. The children are not wide-eyed with wonder, they are wide-eyed with genuine fear. The stories are not designed to soothe, but to terrify. The why behind the seemingly cruel tradition of frightening children into a state of anxiety is purely, brutally practical. These monsters were not just figments of a dark imagination, they were pedagogical tools, memorable and terrifying stand-ins for very real, mundane dangers. A parent could tell a child a dozen times, "Don't go into the fields at noon, you might get sunstroke." This is abstract and easily ignored. But if they tell the child, "The noon witch will cut off your head with her giant scissors if you are in the fields at noon," the message sticks. The image is so vivid, so horrifying, that the child will police their own behavior out of sheer terror. The monster is a far more effective guardian than a simple parental warning. Each monster was a personification of a specific, everyday hazard. The Vodnk was the best swimming lesson a child could ever have. The fear of being dragged to the bottom of the pond and having your soul trapped in a teacup was a powerful deterrent against playing too close to the dangerous riverbank or the deep, treacherous millpond, where a child could easily slip, fall in, and drown. The forest demons were a manifestation of the very real dangers of getting lost in the woods, of exposure, or of encountering wild animals like wolves or bears. The vampires and night spirits reinforced the curfew, keeping children safely indoors after dark, away from the physical and moral dangers of the night. These stories were a form of psychological conditioning, a survival manual passed down through generations. They were the most effective way to teach safety rules in a world without fences, warning signs, or constant adult supervision. The fear instilled by these tales created invisible boundaries around the children, keeping them away from danger far more effectively than any physical barrier. The nightmares they might have were considered a small and acceptable price to pay for their physical safety. It was a grim trade-off, but one made logically in a world where a moment of childish carelessness could lead to a swift and permanent tragedy. This belief in using an extreme release to manage behavior wasn't just for children. The adults had their own version, a holy day that gave them the perfect excuse for sanctioned chaos and drunken brawling. Life in the village is a relentless grind of hard labor, social pressure, and suppressed emotions. The unspoken ledger demands constant vigilance, the church demands piety, and the land demands back-breaking work. You might imagine that the only release from this pressure comes from solemn, pious religious observance. The glamorous illusion of a saint's day, or a church festival, is one of holy reverence and quiet contemplation. You picture villagers in their Sunday best, of course, filing into the church for a special mass. You see them participating in a solemn procession through the village, holding candles and singing hymns, their faces shining with sincere devotion. The day is a peaceful, spiritual respite, a time to reaffirm one's faith and find solace in the sacred rituals of the church. It is a day of peace, prayer, and communal harmony. But as the official church service ends, and the villagers spill out into the square, the pious atmosphere evaporates with shocking speed. The shocking reality is that the local Saints' Day festival, or procession, is the one socially sanctioned occasion for the entire village to get spectacularly drunk and engage in a day of gleeful, chaotic, and often violent revelry. The solemnity of the morning gives way to a roaring afternoon at the tavern. Huge quantities of beer and local spirits are consumed. The quiet, repressed resentments that have been simmering for months, disputes over land boundaries, accusations of gossip, old family feuds, are suddenly allowed to boil over. Fights break out. Not just small scuffles, but full-blown brawls involving dozens of men, fueled by alcohol and pent-up aggression. Women engage in shouting matches, airing grievances that have been festering since the last harvest festival. You watch in amazement as two farmers who were just sharing a hymn book in church are now rolling in the dust, trading clumsy but earnest punches over a disputed fence line. The village authorities, the local reeve or constable, make a token effort to break things up. But for the most part, this behavior is tolerated, even expected. It's a day of sanctioned madness, a collective catharsis, where the strict rules of daily life are temporarily suspended. The air is thick with the smell of spilled beer, sweat, and the raw energy of unleashed frustration. This is not a holy day of peace, It is a pressure release valve for a society on the verge of boiling over. The why behind this bizarre combination of the sacred and the profane is a masterpiece of social engineering. The village leadership and the church, whether they admitted it or not, understood that a life of such intense repression and hardship required an outlet. If you bottle up every grievance, every bit of anger and jealousy, the pressure will eventually cause the whole social structure to explode in a truly destructive way, perhaps through murder or arson. The Saints' Day festival served as a controlled detonation. By allowing, and even tacitly encouraging, a day of drunken brawling and mayhem within a contained time frame, the community could lance the festering wounds of the year. It was a way to get everything out in the open. The fight over the fence line, once settled with bruised knuckles and a shared drink afterward, was likely to be truly settled. The grudges, once shouted aloud in a drunken tirade, lost some of their power. The next day, when everyone woke up with a headache and a sense of shame, there was a communal understanding. What happened at the position stays at the position. A line was drawn, the slate was wiped clean, and the village could return to its state of tense, polite cooperation. The day's chaos was a necessary sacrifice for the year's peace. It was a brutal but effective form of group therapy, flushing the system of its poison so that the daily grind could resume. This pragmatic, if harsh, approach to social management also defined how the community dealt with its final stage of life, old age, and the difficult transition of power from one generation to the next. After a lifetime of hard work, of contributing to the village ledger and surviving the annual release of the Saints' Day brawls, a farmer and his wife finally reach old age. The glamorous illusion of their retirement is one of respected elderhood. You picture the old couple, their faces lined with wisdom and kindness, sitting in the sunniest spot by the stove, the undisputed patriarch and matriarch of the family. They are revered for their experience, their advice sought on matters of planting and animal husbandry. They spend their days telling stories to their grandchildren, doing light, enjoyable tasks like mending or carving, and generally enjoying a well-deserved rest. They are honored, cherished, and cared for by their grateful children until the end of their days, a living testament to the family's strength and continuity. This is the ideal of a dignified and peaceful old age, the just reward for a life of toil. But the reality of this retirement is often far from this idyllic picture. The shocking truth is that the transition of power is governed by a strict, unsentimental contract called the vonic, or exchange. When a farmer becomes too old to work the land effectively, he doesn't simply retire. He formally signs the farm over to his chosen heir, usually his eldest son. In return, the vonic contract legally stipulates what the son must provide for his parents for the rest of their lives. This isn't a gentle understanding. It's a cold, hard list of provisions. For example, it might specify 2 rooms at the north end of the cottage, 1 wagon load of firewood per winter, 10 pounds of flour per month, 1 pint of milk per day, and access to the cabbage patch on Tuesdays. It is a brutally specific, legally binding document that defines the parents' existence. Far from being revered patriarchs, the old couple often becomes a resented burden. They are no longer the heads of the household. They are tenants in the home they built. Their son and his wife are now in charge, and the daily pint of milk or the monthly ration of flour can quickly begin to feel like an onerous tax on the new family's limited resources. The daughter-in-law may resent having to care for her husband's parents, seeing them as extra mouths to feed and extra bodies taking up precious space in the crowded cottage. The sunny spot by the stove is now the prime location, and arguments can break out over who gets to sit there. The old couple, stripped of their authority and economic power, are often relegated to the coldest rooms and the worst food, their contractual rights met with the barest minimum of compliance. The respect they once commanded is gone, replaced by a sullen, begrudging sense of duty. The why behind this grim arrangement is, once again, rooted in the unforgiving economics of the land. The farm could only support one family in charge. For it to remain productive, it needed to be in the hands of a young, strong farmer in his prime. A sentimental refusal to hand over control could lead to the ruin of the entire farm, starving everyone. The vonic contract was a pragmatic solution to this problem. It provided a mechanism for a smooth transfer of power and, in theory, a safety net for the elderly. It was their 19th century pension plan. It codified their right to be cared for, protecting them from being simply cast out once they were no longer useful. However, it was a system that bred resentment. It turned a relationship of love and respect into a legalistic and often bitter transaction. The old parents, who had wielded total authority for decades, now had to plead for the things that were contractually theirs. The son, struggling to establish his own authority and provide for his own growing family, saw his parents not as wise elders, but as a living, breathing expense on his balance sheet. It was a deeply flawed system that often pitted generation against generation. Another grim entry in the village ledger where duty and survival overshadowed affection. This constant public and private accounting, this measurement of worth, was baked into the very food they ate, most notably in the weekly ritual of the communal bread oven. In the center of the village, or perhaps at its edge, stands a large, dome-shaped structure of clay and brick with a heavy iron door. This is the communal bread oven. Once a week, on a designated day, it is fired up, becoming the pulsating heart of the village. The glamorous illusion of this weekly event is one of community cooperation and wholesome abundance. You imagine the women of the village gathering together, laughing and chatting as they wait their turn. The air is filled with the warm, delicious, almost sacred aroma of baking bread. It's a scene of shared labor and shared reward, a symbol of the village working as one to provide its most essential nourishment. Each family brings their uniquely shaped loaves, and the oven provides its magic for all, a testament to their unity and collective spirit. But as you watch the weekly bread day unfold, you see that it is charged with a nervous, competitive energy. The shocking reality is that the communal oven is a public stage, and the bread is a report card that judges the worth of each entire household. There is no anonymity here. Each family's dough is shaped and marked in a specific, recognizable way. When the loaves are pulled from the roaring heat by the woman in charge of the oven, they are placed on a long wooden rack for all to see, and everyone looks, everyone judges. A perfect lo-fi, rounded, with a deep golden brown crust is a public declaration of a well-run home. It says, this household has good quality flour, the woman of the house is a skilled baker, and their affairs are in order. It is a symbol of prosperity and competence. Conversely, a bad loaf is a public humiliation. A loaf that doesn't rise properly, that comes out flat and pale, suggests the family is using poor quality, cheap flour, a sign of poverty. A loaf that is burnt on the outside and duffy on the inside is a testament to the baker's incompetence. It brings shame upon the entire family. You can see the anxious look on a woman's face as she waits for her loaves to emerge. You see her quick glance of relief and pride at a successful batch, or the blush of shame that spreads across her cheeks if her bread is misshapen or scorched. The gossip will start before the loaf has even cooled. Did you see the cos bread today? Flat as a board. They must be struggling. It's a weekly, edible audit of every family's social and economic standing. The why behind this high-stakes baking is that bread was not just food, it was the literal staff of life. The quality of a family's bread was the most visible and reliable indicator of their well-being. In a world of scarcity, a household that could consistently produce good bread was a household that was stable and well-managed. This made the bread a key factor in the village's relentless social accounting. The matchmaker you saw earlier, you can be sure she paid close attention to the quality of a potential bride's family bread. A girl from a family with consistently poor bread was a riskier match. The communal oven wasn't just a shared resource, it was a weekly tribunal. It enforced standards. It kept everyone on their toes. The fear of public shame was a powerful motivator to maintain a high level of domestic skill and resource management. This single loaf of bread, cooling on a public rack, is the perfect symbol for everything you have seen. It represents the vast gap between the pastoral illusion and the gritty reality. It carries the scent of the smoky hearth where the grain was stored, it's made with flour borrowed under the weight of social debt, and it's offered up for public judgment just like a harvest wreath or a wedding ransom. It is the final, tangible entry in that invisible ledger that has governed every moment of life in this place, a ledger of duty, fear, survival, and the endless, exhausting performance of being a good neighbor in a world where everyone is watching. The smoke from the oven's chimney drifts up into the sky, mingling with the haze from the cottage smoke rooms, and it begins to fade into the twilight. The sounds of the villagers shouting, the laughing, the tolling bells all start to soften, to blur at the edges. The sharp details of this life, the biting anxieties, and the harsh realities, begin to recede as you feel yourself growing heavy, your own world calling you back to the comfort of your bed. The vibrant colors of the Sunday costumes, the dark fear of the folktale monsters, the cold calculations of the matchmaker, they all start to feel more like a dream. The intense, lived-in reality of this world, with its invisible ledgers and its constant, wearying vigilance, gives way to a quieter, more distant understanding. You can feel the tension leaving your own shoulders, the need to perform and to judge simply melting away. The worries of this Bohemian village are not your worries. Their debts are not your debts. The silence that you may have once feared is now a welcome invitation to rest, a soft blanket settling over your own thoughts. There is nothing more you need to do, nothing more to learn tonight. You can let the story go, Let the images dissolve like sugar in water, leaving only a sense of peace. The watchman has called the hour, the hearth has been banked for the night, and all is well. All you need to do now is breathe and allow yourself to drift. End of script. Sweet dreams.